Welcome back. We're going to go straight to those live pictures coming to us from Kiev tonight, where the barricades have been set alight by the protesters who fear another assault by security forces this evening. The security forces have been trying to wrest control of what has been the heart of the protest movement since November. For the last 48 hours, the violence has reached new levels. At least 25 people have been killed since Tuesday morning, when protesters tried to reach the country's parliament, where the opposition had hoped to discuss constitutional changes that it is calling for, constitutional changes that would limit the presidential powers of Viktor Yanukovych. Since then, 25 people have died, and repeated assaults by the police on the square have led to new fears again tonight that more assaults are on the way. Earlier, Ukraine's security services announced a nationwide anti-terrorist operation to restore order. Those protests, of course, the heart of which you're looking at, have been going on now for 3 months. Here's a look back at the history of the Maidan protests.
End of November, Ukraine's president formally rejects a free trade pact with the European Union.
I can't leave people to fend for themselves with the problems we face today, and that's why I'm willing to take the risk of not being misunderstood. Listen carefully. I would never do anything to hurt Ukraine or its people.
Anti-government protests have been going on for weeks already. They are now joined by pro-European Ukrainians. It's estimated that half of the population favour ties with the EU, but Yanukovych insists that the country, with a faltering economy, can't afford to sacrifice trade with Russia. As if to confirm this, mid-December, Russian President Vladimir Putin agrees to slash the price of national gas sold to Ukraine and to a multi-billion-dollar bailout.
In order to support the Ukrainian budget, the government of the Russian Federation has taken a decision to invest part of its national reserves into Ukrainian bonds, worth a total of $15 billion.
New year. The now months-old protests continue. The demonstrators have just one resolution for 2014, to see change in leadership and a move towards Europe. Mid-January, the government passes a new law putting restrictions on protests. Seen as a bid to stifle public opinion, the law only increases the street movement, which continues to swell despite the deaths of 3 demonstrators on the 22nd. Days later, a possible end to the standoff is in sight. The law is lifted and the Prime Minister resigns. President Yanukovych offers an olive branch by proposing the newly vacated post to the opposition, but the jest is rejected.
We need to go back to the Constitution of 2004 and do everything we can to make sure power is not placed in the hands of one man.
Yanukovych decides enough is enough, and on Tuesday, February 18th, gives orders to clear Kiev Square.
Well, tonight we're discussing the crisis in Ukraine with my guests. We're joined from Kiev by Volodymyr ISHCHENKO, who's a deputy rector at the Center for Society Research. Thank you for joining us from the Ukrainian capital. Here in the studio, I'm joined by GARMASH, who's a member of the Euro-Maidan collective and has joined us before to discuss the crisis there in Kiev. Also here in the studio, Anton, who's an associate professor the American Graduate School of International Diplomacy. Thank you for joining us. Also with me tonight, Thornike, GORDAZE. Thank you very much for being with us. You are a former Vice Minister of European Affairs in Georgia, also a researcher here at Sciences Po in Paris, and co-editor of the journal Caucasus International. Joelle MAYLAM is also here, French senator from the UMP party, and also sits on the Commission for Foreign Affairs and Defence. Thank you to all of you for being with us tonight. We're going to go straight back to those live pictures, even as we discuss the events there. First of all, GARMASH, since we last met, the violence has become much worse. We last met in January, when already there had been the first bloodshed on the square. Now 25 people have died. This was the outcome that everyone had feared.
Yes, actually they say, according to the official sources, 25 people have died, even more injured, of course. But I've heard that even more people have died already.
Yes, the death toll is far from definitive for now.
Yeah. I've heard around 60. I don't know how reliable those figures are, obviously, but
and the Euro-Maidan remains determined.
Yes, even more determined than before.
We're hearing tonight that the Ukrainian president within the last minutes has replaced his head of the army's general staff. Also in the news tonight is, of course, the fact that the Europeans are planning, after having hesitated for a long time, Joelle, GARRIAUD, MAYLAM, to think about sanctions on Ukraine. It is looking very probable now, according to Laurent Fabius, that this is what will be decided on tomorrow.
At last, we had a meeting at the Committee of Foreign Affairs with Laurent Fabius yesterday, and I asked him about the sanctions, and I insisted on the importance of having sanctions now, that these sanctions have to be targeted, and they have to be given to the members of the oligarchy, the parliament, all the people who are corrupt, and we must act. I've heard that Merkel has said that, you know, there would be discussing the sanctions, but we can't hesitate any longer. I think we Europeans have a huge responsibility in what's happening now, and I regret that we have waited so long. We can't wait anymore, and we must move forward.
Volodymyr ISHCHENKO, in Kiev, how is that possibility of European sanctions considered from Kiev?
As I considered, we waited for like months, and we have heard about many talks and promises about the sanctions that they discussed, but actually nothing happened. Only some visas for some politicians were cancelled in the US, and actually nothing happened in Europe. And yeah, that's people here are waiting for some real action.
We're also hearing this evening, Anton KOSLOV, there's been many questions about the view that Vladimir Putin would take, the role that he would play. We're hearing tonight Germany's Angela Merkel says that she's agreed with Vladimir Putin by telephone to do everything necessary to avoid an escalation of violence in Ukraine. Clearly, the position of Moscow is going to be crucial in the coming days.
Sure, but I do not represent Moscow here, so let's make it clear, because people always think that I work for the Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry. It's not the case. Nevertheless, certainly Russia has its legitimate interest in Ukraine, will protect its interest, will do whatever is possible. You know, Vladislav Surkov is the one who is responsible for the Russian role and the Russian interest in the Ukraine, and he's been going there quite a lot. So I think Russia certainly will do everything, and I do not think that those European sanctions will do much of good for Ukraine or for anybody.
Already Moscow has accused Europe of interfering. Is that a view you agree with?
Yeah, I certainly do, yeah. Oh, yeah, well, if you heard the recording of Victoria's conversation with the American ambassador in Kiev, it's very funny, you know, the exchange. And it's it's been in open access on YouTube, so...
Yeah. If I may say something regarding these sanctions, I myself have always been against sanctions because very often it's the population which suffers. In this case, we're talking about targeted sanctions against individuals whom we know have taken a leading role and who are corrupt. We know these people.
Everybody's corrupt in Ukraine. I mean, come on. I mean, you cannot decide. I mean, the entire conflict is in different oligarchic groups there.
When you are a politician, you've got a duty, and we've got to change the situation because corruption leads to more corruption if you don't put a stop to it. I'll give you just an example. There's a French bank, one of our most important national banks, BNP, which has a subsidiary in Ukraine, which has made a loan of $70 million to an Ukrainian company with guarantees, personal guarantees from two of these oligarchs who were supposed to repay. That was in 2007. It has never been repaid. They went to justice. And justice, unfortunately, is corrupt as well. And they can't win. I mean, these people, why should they be allowed to come to France Why should they be allowed to reside in their beautiful palaces when they are obviously dishonest? They've got to pay force. We've got to stop the visas.
Excuse me. I mean, it's a purely criminal issue of, of financial relations. It has nothing to do with Maidan or the political situation there.
No, I'm sorry. It has to do with Maidan because we've got to draw now a list of the politicians of the European region, well, the party of the regions, who have been leading a part and who have had a responsibility on this, what's happening in Maidan. I was on Maidan in Kiev last week. I saw the demonstrations. I was so impressed by the dignity of these people who were demonstrating in a very peaceful, orderly way. The only thing they were afraid that there would be these titushniks who would come to provoke them and create some problems that the government would take advantage of to suppress them. And that's exactly what's happening. And we've got to stop this violence right now.
I'd like to put the issue of sanctions to Thornike GORDAZE. You are, of course, a former Vice Minister of European Affairs in Georgia, the previous battleground between Moscow and the EU in the region.
Indeed, what is happening in Ukraine and in Kiev, it's very important not only for Ukraine or even for the region, the whole eastern neighborhood of the European Union, because it's crucial what is going on there for the future of all these 6 countries that are part of Eastern Partnership Initiative of the European Union, but it will determine the future of the European Union. How the European Union will deal with Russia, with neighbors. What is the future of European Union? When you are talking about, it has nothing to do with the corruption, has nothing to do with Maidan. It has everything to do with Maidan because Ukrainians are for European Union because they don't want to have the corrupt regime. They don't have to have the same evolution as what happened in Russia, in some other post-Soviet countries. And this is the Europeanism, this European dream is not just for European flags. This is something very concrete in their minds. And that's why they are pursuing this dream. This is obvious for them. You ask them, for them, a European Union was something, and all negotiations that Mr. Yanukovych was keeping alive with the European Union for 4 years. They were talking and the negotiations were advancing. He was promising that they will sign at the end of the day the association agreement. That's why all this protest was silent. When they saw that it was not the case, and the light at the end of the tunnel was switched off, that's why all this protest erupted.
Anna GARMASH, is that what is at the heart of your protest?
Yes, of course. One should never forget why the people came onto the streets in the first place. That is to say, they are against this corruption. Precisely, this is just one of the cases. The case you mentioned. This is just one of many cases that happened, and this is why people are in the streets against corruption, for respect of human rights, against this partial justice. They want just independent courts. This makes sense.
And Anton, KOSLOV, the people of Ukraine have had enough.
You know what? I do not know what does it mean, the people of Ukraine, because there are different groups, different languages, different regions. Theoretically, we can talk about the people who speak Ukrainian and Russian, but the people of Ukraine, just like the people of Russia or the people of the United States, it's nothing but a political tool, So let's see what's going on today. I'm not at all in favor of Yanukovych, but what's going on today is basically pushing the country on the brink of a civil war. That is something that everybody wants to avoid. So I think the only way is to negotiate. The problem with Euro-Maidan today is that you've got people in Kiev who are not controlled by anybody, not by the opposition, not by the government, and it's getting very, very dangerous.
I'd like to put that to Volodymyr ISHCHENKO, who's joining us from Kiev. The people in Maidan, not necessarily representative, and in any case, pushing the country towards a dangerous civil war.
Actually, the chance for the civil war is as high as probably since 1950s, when the nationalist guerrillas, the last national guerrilla bands were actually surrendered to the Soviet state. We haven't seen anything like that for 60, 70 years. And yes, it's very important to underline that there are actually really dangerous elements among the protesters. There were many far-right activists who were participating in the protest since its started in November. And for the weeks, not so many people were actually worried about them, and they were actually shutting their eyes about the quite dangerous radicals. And at some point, they started actually to act. The first violence actually started not in January, but also already on the 1st of December last year, when they attempted to attack the presidential administration building. And then it was quite logical that they would start the violence again, and this night they got the firearms in the Western regions police departments. So the situation is really dangerous, and the negotiations between the government and the protesters is actually probably the best way at this point when we can actually save the lives of the people on the streets, among the police officers, and even among the ordinary citizens who do not participate in the clashes. And it's also important to state that not so many people are actually participating in the violence. When in December, the mass rallies on Maidan Square, they were assembling hundreds of thousands of people, and they were coming each Sunday in December. But now we have something like 10 or 20,000 people who are at the square now, and those who are actually are ready to fight with the police and to defend the protest camp. So we see the decrease of the number of active supporters. Many people are actually scared of the violence which is starting to happen, and it's increasing the scale of the violence in the city.
Anna GARMASH, is that something that you recognize? The proportion of people, troublemakers, if you like, people who are not there for the right reasons, has increased, allowing, we've heard Viktor Yanukovych, the security forces, announce this anti-terrorist operation countrywide. In fact, Ukraine's already announced a replacement for the chief of the country's armed forces. This within the last minutes as the military prepares to take part in that anti-terrorist operation. It does not bode well for the possibility of reconciliation or dialogue.
The thing is, there was no dialogue to begin with. The Euro-Maidan protesters actually wanted a dialogue at the very beginning, and they kept on wanting this dialogue for quite a long time. But the thing is, every time they tried to talk to the people in power, it didn't end up well, just because there was no dialogue as such. It was just buying time or pretending for probably, I don't know, the Western powers that the dialogue is sort of existing, but there was no answer from the power. None of it actually came.
I would add just one very short element. Any government that wants to discredit protest refuses dialogue and acts violently. Then the violence provokes violence from the side of the protesters. We saw this evolution at the beginning. These people who are radical, and of course we should recognize that there are some elements that are not controlled and they are very radical. They were in minority. When you want to discredit the whole movement, and we see that the extreme majority of those people who are in the streets are not violent, so you are using violence, and that happened in the history of many other states, and that happened also during. Well, we can see these things happening in other countries very close to Ukraine.
Let's have a look at what some of our viewers have been tweeting tonight. President refuses talks. Protesters do not have weapons. That's why there's no progress. So backing up what you were just saying. Another tweet by one of our viewers this evening: if Yanukovych employs the army, we'll witness a civil war in Ukraine, a nightmare for that country and for Europe. And we'll come back to that in just a moment with the French senator in particular that we have in our studio tonight. 29 minutes past 7. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back for the second part of tonight's debate.